Okay. All right, we're rolling. Episode 3 here. Oh, well, whatever. Whatever episode this is.
Dream of Laamu, 1970s.
Dream of Laamu. So what is Laamu?
All right.
First of all, what is that one word?
It's an atoll.
2 words?
Laamu. No, it's one word. It's a little atoll off of the East African coast up from Mombasa and Malindi.
Okay.
It's north of there. It's a mangrove little... It's not an island. It's an atoll, as they would call it. And it's...
Which is what? Kind of like a...
Yeah, just a spit of land.
Like a peninsula?
Kind of like a peninsula without any access other than by boat.
Uh-huh.
You know, it's not quite considered an island.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, when I was working, when your mom and I were working with the Jane Goodall thing, Hugo needed to take a break and go back to London, so we had some time off and had heard through the grapevine about this place called Laamu. And so we got to Nairobi and took the train down to Mombasa, then took a bus up to Malindi, and then a final bus that was quite interesting because this is the kind of bus that you put chickens and livestock and just about every member of your family in. And usually when you had to cross water, it was a rope barge, so everybody would get out and pull the bus across. So it was really, this time was in the, mid to early 70s. So it's probably, 73 or something. And it was infrastructure was pretty primitive in Africa at that time. So we got to Laamu, and I absolutely fell in love with this place. It's sort of a natural basin that catches water in the rock, and so it makes it livable. There was no electricity in the place. It's just looks like something out of a Hemingway novel, or Jack, who's another great adventurer. It was really raw Africa, everybody walking around in turbans and white robes and narrow little streets, which promoted the air circulation in town. So
and this was on the atoll, or this was?
Yeah, no, this was in the atoll of Laamu.
So the atoll, by the way, just
to
clarify, an atoll is a ring-shaped reef, island, or chain of islands formed of coral.
Yes.
So
and that would be correct.
That's why it's different exactly from an island. It's specifically, it's a coral reef, essentially.
Basically, you're right. And with beach, and obviously the coral's gotten into sandy. So one of the things that was intriguing there was this dhow trade, which is a form of sailing vessel that carries cargo. And it has this lantine rig, which is a kind of one triangular sail. It's not fast, but it's efficient. And it's good for the trade winds. So these are big wooden boats that were generally built along the coast of East Africa, all by hand tools. There was no electric tools or anything, so there was adzes and hand drills and everything. And they would actually, for the keel, they used to, in the old days, grow trees in the shape and trim them so it would be a shape of a perfect keel, long and curved at the ends. So that that would be it. It's fascinating. A lot of mangroves around there too. So that was one of the reasons the trade route was that these dhows would travel from the Persian Gulf and come down to the coast of Africa.
Who would travel?
These sailors, these commercial captains of dhows, the sailing vessels.
Oh.
They would travel the coast. It was a trade route. And they'd come from the Persian Gulf and bring goods from there that they didn't have in Africa. And they needed wood. And this particular wood down there, the mangrove, was what they would bring back up to the Persian Gulf. So they would sail all the way. These boats had no engines or anything. They were all sailing vessels.
And a dhow is a type
You can look it up.
Type of ship?
Yeah. It's a type of boat with a lantine sailing rig. Very efficient for trade winds because they're steady, and that worked well for them, and you didn't have to have a lot of sails to deal with, like a Marconi rig, which would be in a modern sailboat, where you have a jib and a mainsail. So, I was...
DHOW.
Right.
Okay. Wow, I'm learning so much here.
Yeah.
Like these guys?
That's exactly it.
All right. Cool.
So, as I recall, I was very fascinated with this and thought, wow, what a great story there is here about these people living kind of a mixture. They called themselves Afrikaners, which is a little mixture of Muslims and a blend of the African culture. Because in East Africa at that time, and probably still today, you had clans or tribes. It's very tribal. Mm-hmm. So at the time, the Kikuyus were in power, and so anybody that wasn't a Kikuyu didn't have much power. That's just the way it works over there. Mm-hmm. But these Afrikaners were sort of separate because they were separated so much from the main coast, and they kind of had their own lifestyle, and it was very simple. You'd walk around at night with candles or flashlights, and this is the way you would navigate the streets. And it was really designed so that the airflow would work well because it gets quite hot there, and then you have all these beautiful white beaches. So that's where we spent, I don't know, a week or so, I think, maybe 10 days. Who knows? Can't remember the exact timing. But anyway, it never left my mind. I just kept thinking about this. So when I got back to the States, and I kind of approached National Geographic because I had some connections there with them through Jane Goodall about doing a story on it. But at the time, they didn't seem particularly interested. But I was captivated by the whole thing, and I wanted to get back there. There was a movie, there was a film. I needed to get some footage just to show people what I was talking about. So I started writing up this proposal called Dream of Laamu. And in that process, I shared it with my friend Robert Morgan, who I went to college at the University of New Mexico with. And he suggested that I get in touch with some friends that he knew that had this sailing vessel, this like 80-foot Baltic ketch that they had actually picked up in Denmark or somewhere. It was a Baltic vessel that was a commercial wooden sailing boat built in the 1800s, I think, or early 1900s. And they had acquired this, and they had sailed all the way down to Haiti and around, and they were currently in the Chesapeake Bay. So he at the time was in D.C. because he was from the Silver Spring area. And we went down and he introduced me, and I started talking to him about this idea of going to Africa, of sailing this boat to Africa and making a documentary. Everybody said, well, that's well and good. How are we going to finance this? So I was putting together a proposal, had photos, and, put a whole script together. Somewhere I have this still, some of this info. And
yeah, where would that be?
Somewhere in the barn, somewhere, something to dig out. And
I'd love to. We should dig that out.
We will have to do that. So I wasn't having a lot of luck. Here I was, a 20-something kid, and somebody says, oh, you want $100,000 to go off, and this sounds like a nice vacation, but we're not going to support that. So then in talking with the crew, they mentioned to me that they had been approached by some marijuana smugglers, about who were trying to get their goods up to the coast of Maine and have it dropped off. And they had approached them a couple times about doing this, and they hadn't seemed interested at the time. But now that this project came up, they talked to them, and they said, okay, we'll do something. And so they actually advanced them $30,000 to get the boat ready to go because it needed some work.
The smugglers did.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the operation. And this was to go down and connect in memory here. Just a second. I got to figure this all out. Just a second. Hold on. Down to the Caribbean, down even further than that, over towards Turks and Caicos Islands, which is way down off of Dominican Republic and Cuba. It's sitting in there, and this was at a time when Turks and Caicos was not particularly popular. And so the plan was to provision the boat and sail out and head down there to meet up with the connection, and then we were supposed to pick up the goods at some little island, a little spot in the water there that the handoff would be. But as all good plans, that really well, let me go back. First of all, we sailed out of Chesapeake Bay, all kind of excited about this new adventure and this journey, and here we go, in pirates ahoy. We look like a pirate ship, big maroon sails, and
so what
this
was
old wooden boat.
Who was on the ship with you?
Well,
at that point,
there was about 6 of us. I can't remember everybody's name anymore, but there was about 6 of us on that boat.
And what portion of those were people that were just part of the boat, who owned the boat? And who was
5. I would
crew?
Say I think there was like 4 or 5 of them that owned it, and then there was me and my roommate Paul. About 19. Yeah, he'd be my roommate about 1969 in this little house that we had. And so he got really interested in this, and so we
that was
wanted.
in San Francisco?
No.
In Maryland?
No, this was in
D.C. or?
Yeah, in D.C., Maryland area. Right. It was about the time I met your mom and stuff like that. I was living there.
And you were living in D.C. probably?
No. Outside of it, just outside of
Where?
Gaithersburg. Outside of Gaithersburg. I don't know. Some place in the hill. I don't remember the name of the area anymore. No, I don't. I remember the house. It was an A-frame house, but it was located just outside of Rockville, Gaithersburg area.
Okay.
But I couldn't tell you exactly pinpoint it anymore.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's been developed by now.
Sure.
So Paul and I had lived together, and when I got back, we had stayed connected, and he got interested in this project also, being a crew member, because we wanted some more crew. And the other person who was involved with this is my old friend from San Francisco and your mom's, and Louise, who knew him, Doug Dickinson, which you've heard about.
Yeah.
And so Doug was involved in filmmaking, and I've been doing filmmaking, so we wanted to do something with that. So he was going to be a part of it once we brought the goods back and had dumped them off in Maine. Then we would have connected and put the film thing, because the payoff was over $100,000, to do this.
Got it. So you were doing this smuggling mission in order to get the money, and then you were going to come back and then use the same boat to go back to Laamu.
Right, to sail across the Atlantic and, down to the canals and retrace the steps of the dhow trade and the building of the dhows, and putting a whole film together about that piece of nautical history.
But you needed to do that.
Well, I was pretty obsessed with it. When I get hooked on an idea, I just don't let it go. So I just kept poking it and trying to, persevere and stick to it and try to make this happen.
Yeah.
But
you were so you were in Gaithersburg, and you were living with this guy Paul.
Well, that was before. And then your mom and I got married in 1972, so we had gone to Africa, and so in between I was building a cover story about this whole thing.
But you guys were living... When you went to Africa...
But when we came back, we were living in the Rockville area.
Okay.
We were living in... Actually,
when you left for Africa the first time, you were in San Francisco.
Exactly. But when we came back, we ended up back in D.C. at her parents' house for a while. I can't remember. I think we did get that house. No, we didn't have the Washington Grove house at that time, I don't think. That was later. We were living somewhere. I don't know. I think with parents or something. It was because it was unsettled at that time, what was going on. And then I got involved in doing this project of putting this thing together. So the cover was that I had hooked up with these guys and they needed crew members. And the idea was that somebody was chartering the boat to go down to the islands.
Right.
So that was the cover story. And nobody dug into it too carefully. So I was able to keep that story alive. And it just so happened that Jaji had a thing in Switzerland, in Geneva, project for a year. So the idea is that Susie would go with them and stay in Geneva with them while I was off bouncing around trying to put this project together. Mm-hmm. So that's the backstory. So anyway, we sailed out, and I remember the first night we got out of Chesapeake Bay that there was, middle of the night, there was a storm that brewed up, these squalls would come up. And all of a sudden I'm rolled out of bed, the boat's moving everywhere, I'm trying to stay my ground, I'm not even sure I had a PDF on. I was just holding on. It was like all hands on deck and pulling on lines and bringing sails down because this thing, we would sail 24 hours a day, so we had different watches.
Yeah.
And so when you had a storm or something come up, everybody had to get up and be there to handle this boat.
And you said PDF, is that like a life
jacket? Yeah, like a life jacket, yeah. Personal flotation device, PFD. Excuse me, PFD.
You didn't even have a digital text document?
No, we did not. PFD. So we that was a pretty harrowing night, and this is one of my afflictions because that night we had eggplant parmesan. And
this is the origin of eggplant phobia.
Exactly. And I never actually threw up, but I regretted not doing that because forever in my mind I cannot stand the look or smell or anything to do with eggplant because of that incident, because I felt just nauseous for days. And but there were some magical moments too, of sitting in the bowsprit on the netting there up forward, and watching dolphins swimming in front of the blue sea, because we were in the Gulf Stream at that time. So you have this amazingly blue water. It's just so crystal clear. So we probably spent a week to 10 days in that boat to get down there, and in all kinds of various conditions of strange seas and choppy seas and beautiful following seas with a full moon behind it, which was really gorgeous. But we got down to the Cockburn Harbor in Turks and Caicos, and it was very undeveloped at that time. But what a spectacular area. Conch shells, lobster, sea life everywhere. And this is where I got my first real experience with diving. There was this guy from I think he was British or something, that had this little diving service. I mean, it was just like a pup tent, and he had some diving equipment, and there was an old hotel up there, and it was just a village of locals that lived there. There was no hotels or anything fancy at that time. It was just plain. It was a perfect place to hide out for a while, because we were waiting for the connection to meet up with the boat where we would load up, and he was having some issues getting it there. And I can't tell you all the details because nobody shared that with me. That was just, he kept it pretty tight between those guys and just said, listen, there's a problem and you're going to have to hang out there for a while. So we befriended this guy that ran the diving outfit, and he said, hey, you want to go diving? And we said, sure. And so he provided some equipment and tanks and took us down 100 feet, which is, a long ways, and kind of explained what you had to do because I didn't have any diving certification at that time.
Right?
Right. You got to stop coming up and everything. But he took me down, and this marvelous world opened up. Here's this huge reef there, and all along the reef was big fish, rays and sharks and all kinds of stuff. Every fish you can imagine in clear water. You're 100 feet down, and it's crystal clear. So, I was aghast. I'm just looking around with big bulged eyes.
So there's a reef. Was it like a coral reef there? Or?
Yeah. It was a really good coral reef. And then it dropped off into fathoms, after that. But the big fish that's where they were hunting. Mm-hmm. So it was a absolutely amazing experience, for a kid. Like, here we are, the pirate thing, running around with nothing but a sheet around you pretty much, or a pair of shorts or nothing, diving around, getting conchs, getting lobsters for meals. And these were the ones they're not like Maine lobsters, they just have the tail. They're the Caribbean style lobster. And just hanging and waiting.
Yeah.
You must have sat out there for 3 or 4 weeks just waiting to make this connection. And finally, the guy comes and says, we're not going to connect there. There's just too much activity with the Coast Guard. They're watching everything pretty close. So they said, sail on to San Juan. Go on over to San Juan, Puerto Rico, and we'll figure it out from there. Well, we obviously started seeing Coast Guard everywhere. They were had a bead on us. They said,
what are these guys up to?
These guys are up to. This looks suspicious. So we got into San Juan and hung out there for a couple weeks. And I started getting a little that gut feeling like this is not going to come down the way we were hoping. Mm-hmm. So it's going to spiral into some sort of disaster. So I said, listen, I need to get this movie made. I've got my film buddy is waiting. Well, I'm going to have to come up with another plan. So this is your guys' deal to put this together, I guess. And I don't know. It was just really weird. And I got the feeling of, I got to get out of here. Mm-hmm. This wasn't working. So I left. And
wait, you left out of San Juan? You just took a
plane. I got on a plane,
and you told them, you're like, guys, I'm out.
Yeah, I just said, I got a bad feeling like this isn't going to come down. We're being watched. This guy's got his issues. I don't see how this is going to happen. You're welcome to continue on. And, there were some bad feelings, and I understand, but, at the same time, I didn't want to end up in jail for years, so I decided it was time to bail out on it.
Yeah.
It's just one of those choices in life you have to make. And I wasn't in control of it at that point. All I could deal is what I did have control, which was trying to get this film made. So I flew back, and then Doug Dickinson had already come back to Connecticut, so we came up with a plan of backpacking the gear. One guy we had this wound up Bolex camera that you would wind up and put about 50 feet of film in and shoot it out, and then hope for the best, right? A little crude, but it's what we had. And I still have that case around too. It's back in Arizona. And we carried that thing. We set it up so it would be a backpack. It was a big metal case, and one guy would carry that, and another guy would carry a backpack with clothes, our personal belongings. That was it. That was how we were going to travel. And we arranged to get flights to England.
And you were going to try to do the Laamu thing?
I was just going to go straight there and try to get on to a boat. Mm-hmm. And so the idea was, okay, well, it's almost 11:52, so we're going to probably have to stop here and pick up with flying with Doug to London.
Okay.
And then, because there's a whole lot of story there.
We got part 2 of Dream of Laamu.
Part 2 coming up.
Yeah. All right, perfect. Great, Dad. That was fun. I've heard a lot of that story before. And now
you got it down.
Yeah, I'd almost love to kind of dig back into some of the
detail. Well, think about it. You can ask.
That's great.
Well, the part of going to Laamu with Doug is the interesting part of that whole thing too. All right.